March 24th, 1,945 30,000 feet above the smoldering ruins of Berlin. Lieutenant Roscoe Brown grips the control stick of his P-51 Mustang, a machine of polished aluminum and red-tipped wings cutting through thin, icy air. His target, a shadow streaking 3 miles ahead, the Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet fighter. No propeller, no roar of piston cylinders, just the shrill, alien whine of twin jet engines, Germany's last technological gamble. The Me-262 was faster, deadlier, and unlike anything Allied pilots had ever faced. 430mm cannons mounted in its nose could shred a bomber or fighter in seconds. The Luftwaffe believed it was invincible. But Brown isn't any ordinary pilot. He's a Tuskegee Airman, one of the fabled red tails of the 332nd Fighter Group. And in the next minute, this 24-year-old from New York will do something the German High Command claimed was impossible: shoot down a jet in a propeller plane. That day, over the fractured heart of Nazi Germany, 3 red-tail pilots, Brown, Brantley, and Lane, would destroy 3 Me-200 in 62 seconds in open aerial combat. They would prove that courage and discipline could outfly technology, and that skill, not skin color, defined a pilot's worth. It became one of the most extraordinary dogfights of the Second World War, and yet, for decades, almost no one talked about it. To understand why this moment mattered, you have to know who the Red Tails were. The Tuskegee Airmen, officially the 332nd Fighter Group and 99th Fighter Squadron, were the first black military aviators in U.S. history. Their existence was a direct challenge to an American military built on segregation and pseudoscience. Before 1941, the U.S. Army Air Corps had barred black men from becoming pilots, citing studies claiming African Americans lacked the intelligence and reflexes for combat aviation. These weren't fringe ideas. They were written into official Army doctrine, signed by generals, taught at the academies. When the Army finally agreed to train black pilots, it called the program an experiment. The expectation was failure. At the Tuskegee Army Airfield in Alabama, candidates trained under segregated conditions scrutinized at every turn. A single failure would be used as proof that all black pilots were unfit to fly. But the opposite happened. The first class graduated in March 1942 under Captain Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., son of the Army's first black general. The cadets studied longer, flew harder, and carried the crushing knowledge that one mistake could doom every pilot who followed. Against impossible pressure, they excelled. By 1944, the Tuskegee Airmen were deployed to Italy, flying P-47 Thunderbolts and later the sleeker, faster P-51 Mustangs. They painted the tails of their aircraft bright red, a mark that soon became legend. Their mission: escort American bombers deep into German territory. B-17 seconds and B-24 seconds, flying daylight raids, suffered horrific losses. Bomber crews had lower survival odds than infantrymen on the front line. But when the Red Tails flew cover, something changed. Unlike other escort groups that broke formation to chase kills, the 332nd stayed with the bombers. Stay with them, protect them no matter what. It was their doctrine, drilled into every pilot. Soon, white bomber crews were asking for the Red Tails by name. Some refused to fly without them. The myth grew. They never lost a bomber. Technically, a few were lost, but compared to other groups, their record was unmatched. The result was the same: trust, respect, and a reputation for perfection. By March 1945, the Red Tails had flown over 15,000 combat sorties, destroyed more than 100 German aircraft in the air, 150 on the ground, and earned 3 distinguished unit citations. They'd proven what their commanders once denied, that black pilots could not only fight but excel. Yet they had never faced jets. The Messerschmitt Me 262 was Germany's last great hope. Nicknamed Schwabe Swallow, it was decades ahead of its time. Powered by twin Jumo 004 turbojets, it could reach 560 miles per hour, nearly 100 miles per hour faster than the best Allied fighters. Its armament was terrifying. 4 30mm Mk108 cannons, each capable of tearing a bomber apart with a single shell. Allied pilots who survived encounters described it like facing a ghost, a flash, a roar, and then destruction. But the jet had weaknesses. The Jumo engines were fragile, lasting barely 25 hours before needing replacement. Throttle too hard, and they'd flame out. Take one hit, and they could explode. Worse, the Me 262 was vulnerable during takeoff and landing when its speed advantage vanished. Allied intelligence knew this. Pilots were briefed: attack the jets when they're low, or force them into turning fights where their speed can't save them. Still, air-to-air kills against the Me 262 were almost unheard of. Germany should have produced thousands of them, but Hitler intervened. Obsessed with revenge against London, he ordered that the Me 262 be converted into a bomber, delaying production for nearly a year. By the time it reached the front in 1944, it was too late. Germany was out of fuel, pilots, and time. By March 1945, only about 200 operational Me 262 seconds remained. And on that cold spring morning, 3 of them would meet the Red Tails over Berlin. Dawn at Ramitelli Airfield, Italy. The 332nd Fighter Group receives its briefing. Escort B, 17 flying fortresses to Berlin, protect them at all costs. 64 Mustangs take off, crimson tails glinting in the morning light. Among them, Lieutenant Roscoe Brown, 24, from New York City, disciplined, analytical, flying his 68th mission. Captain Charles Brantley, 23, from Georgia, fearless, known for diving into hopeless fights. Lieutenant Earl Lane, 22, from Texas, precise, deliberate, a former bomber pilot turned fighter ace. 2 hours north over Europe, black puffs of flak bloom around the bombers. The formation holds. They cross into Germany, the land below scarred and burning. Berlin lies ahead, battered but defiant. At 11:30 a.m., over the city, someone calls over the radio. Jets, 2 o'clock high. 2 Me 262 seconds are descending fast, lining up to strike. Roscoe Brown pushes his throttle forward and climbs. Every manual says the jet should outrun him, but the German pilot makes a fatal error. He turns. Brown's Mustang tightens its turn radius, machine guns spitting fire. Tracers slice the sky, stitching across the Me 262's engine. A burst of flame, smoke. The jet rolls and plunges toward the ruins below. Roscoe Brown has just done the impossible. A propeller-driven P-51 has downed a jet over Berlin. And this was only the beginning. 30 miles south of Berlin, the air is chaos. The bomber formation is breaking away after its run. Smoke and shrapnel still thick in the sky. Captain Charles Brantley of the 301st Fighter Squadron scans the horizon when a silver blur cuts across his vision. A Messerschmitt, a Me 262, diving straight through the bombers. The German jet fires a devastating burst from its nose-mounted cannons. AB-17 shudders midair, its right wing shredded, one engine flaming. Brantley doesn't hesitate. He banks sharply and dives, his Mustang's Merlin engine howling at full throttle. The sensible thing to do would be to pull back. A P-51 can't catch a jet. But Brantley knows something most don't. The Me-262's engines are fragile. Push them too hard and they flame out. He dives harder, past the Mustang's safety limits. The airframe vibrates violently. The control stick feels alive, trembling in his hands. Ahead, the Me-262 pilot glances back, perhaps in disbelief that anyone would dare chase him. He throttles forward and his right engine coughs, sputters, then bursts into flame. Brantley closes in, presses the trigger. His 6 .50 caliber machine guns hammer the sky, tracers tearing into the jet's fuselage. The second engine explodes. The aircraft disintegrates mid-air. The Luftwaffe's miracle weapon has become a fireball tumbling into the German countryside. 2 jets down. To the northeast, Lieutenant Earl Lane, flying with the 99th Squadron, spots another Me-262 climbing alone through 20,000 feet, a rare mistake. Lane's Mustang sits 4,000 feet higher. He rolls over, diving fast, gravity pushing him toward the enemy like a falling spear. The German pilot sees the dive, panics, and tries to accelerate away. But at that altitude, his jet engines respond sluggishly. Lane's Mustang picks up speed, roaring past 500 miles per hour, almost matching the Me-262's maximum. He squeezes the trigger. Rounds punch into the jet's left engine and cockpit. The Me-262 rolls, trailing smoke, then vanishes in a steep, unrecoverable dive. 3 jets destroyed in one day by 3 Black American pilots flying obsolete propeller planes. When the 332nd returned to Ramitelli Airfield that evening, ground crews rushed to greet them. The mood was cautious. Disbelief rumors had already spread over the radio that Red Tails had downed jets. Intelligence officers demanded immediate debriefings. Gun camera footage was examined frame by frame. Witness statements from bomber crews confirmed it. 3 confirmed kills. All Messerschmitt Me-262 seconds, all in open combat, not during takeoff or landing. A feat no other U.S. fighter group had achieved. But here's where the story darkens. When white fighter squadrons achieved similar victories, even single jet kills, they were celebrated across newspapers, paraded as national heroes. When Major John Meyer shot down 2 Me-262 seconds earlier that month, his photo appeared in Life magazine. But the Red Tails' triumph over Berlin? Barely a whisper. Official reports confirmed the kills, but avoided any fanfare. No headlines, no press briefings. Why? Because these were black pilots. The same Air Force leadership that once argued they couldn't fly, couldn't lead, couldn't fight, now faced a reality that shattered decades of racist doctrine. Recognizing their achievement publicly would mean admitting that America's racial hierarchy was built on lies. So the silence was deliberate. Back home, families of Tuskegee Airmen learned of the mission only through letters. Some didn't even hear about the jet kills until decades later. The official after-action reports sat in archives, gathering dust. Hollywood went on to make dozens of World War II films, 12 O'Clock High, Memphis Belle, the Dam Buster stories of courage and brotherhood. None featured black pilots. This wasn't omission by accident. It was erasure by design. Even within the military, history books written in the 1,950 seconds glossed over the 332nd. When they were mentioned, it was briefly, clinically stripped of the drama, danger, and brilliance of their missions. The heroism of Roscoe Brown, Brantley, and Lane was reduced to statistics. But truth has a way of resurfacing. By the 1,970 seconds, historians began re-examining war records. They discovered forgotten mission logs, combat reports, and interviews buried in boxes labeled Negro units. Slowly, the narrative shifted. Documentaries aired, books were written. Veterans came forward, their voices steady but edged with decades of quiet frustration. Roscoe Brown said years later, "We knew what we'd done. The bomber crews knew, the other pilots knew, but back home, nobody wanted to hear about it. We weren't part of the story America wanted to tell yet." That single day over Berlin, March 24th, 1945, came to symbolize much more than aerial victory. It was a test of two kinds of power: technological power and moral power. Technologically, it proved that the jet age wouldn't automatically erase the pilot's skill. The Red Tails used intellect, discipline, and tactics, forcing the jets into turning fights, exploiting engine weaknesses, using altitude advantage.
Flew escort missions.
Their performance was a
Statistics were
textbook
average.
lesson that superior machines don't guarantee victory. Militarily,
Their names
it
are
marked a
lost in
turning
long,
point in
bureaucratic
combat
list of other
philosophy.
pilots and numbers.
5 years later, when the Korean War began and American pilots faced Soviet MiG-15 jets, they relied on tactics first developed against the Me-262. Lessons written in blood by men who never got their due credit. But the deeper significance was human. The Tuskegee Airmen didn't just fight the Luftwaffe, they fought an American system that doubted their humanity. Every flight was a statement. Every escort mission, every kill was a defiance of a society that told them they were inferior. On March 24th, they didn't just beat the German jets, they
While
beat the American
Me-262
lie.
showcased German
When President
engineering,
Truman signed
these
Executive
brave
Order
airmen proved
9,981 inches, 1,948, ending racial segregation in the U.S. Armed Forces, the Tuskegee record was cited as proof that integration strengthened, not weakened, the military. Historians now see that the success of the 332nd helped lay the moral foundation for that order. The Red Tails had not only protected bombers, they'd helped change America itself. And yet, when these men came home, they returned to the same segregated buses, the same colored entrances, the same denial of rights. Captain Brantley, back in Georgia, couldn't vote. He could shoot down enemy jets over Berlin, but not buy a cup of coffee in a white cafe. Earl Lane became a physician, serving the poor black communities of the South. Roscoe Brown became a university president, devoting his life to education. Each carried the quiet dignity of someone who had proved his worth in the sky and didn't need the world's permission to know it. In 2007, more than 60 years later, the U.S. government finally awarded the Tuskegee Airmen the Congressional Gold Medal. President George W. Bush, addressing the survivors, said, "Because of your skill and courage, our armed forces became stronger. Because of your example, our country became better." It was long overdue. But for the men who had flown under the Red Tails, recognition was never the goal. It was about excellence, doing the job no matter who tried to stop them. What they achieved on March 24th, 1945 wasn't supposed to be possible. But then again, neither was their existence. The Luftwaffe's jets represented the future of war, sleek, mechanical, merciless. The Red Tails represented the future of America, determined, defiant, and human. And in that cold Berlin sky, humanity won. Rewind the tape and examine the 3 kills like an accident investigator, reconstructing a crash frame by frame, variable by variable. What looks like heroic instinct in the headlines is, in truth, the culmination of discipline, doctrine, and 1,000 hours of repetition that converged in seconds. Start with Roscoe Brown. Intelligence briefings had hammered 3 imperatives into every escort pilot. Never chase a jet in level flight. Make the enemy solve a geometry problem he can't win, and aim for the engines. Brown's climb against the Me-262 brakes, Rule 1, only on the surface. In reality, he's not chasing, he's pre-positioning. He turns the fight into a radius contest, shrinking the circle until the jet's speed is a liability. Jet thrust is magnificent on the straightaway. It's unforgiving in the turn, especially with Jumo 004 compressors that spool slowly and surge easily. Brown's guns don't just find the right engine, they solve it. A controlled burst at convergence range where bullet trajectories cross like railroad tracks. The result is catastrophic asymmetry for the Me-262 drag blossoms on one side. Torque and yaw tear the arc apart, and gravity does the rest. Now Brantley, his decision looks reckless, dive past placarded limits. Ride the buffet, trust the Merlin to hold together until you add the context. The Me-262 pilot must baby his throttles. The Jumo's turbine blades, made from inferior alloys thanks to a starving wartime industry, hate heat spikes. If the German shoves the levers forward, he risks a compressor stall or worse, a hot section meltdown. Brantley weaponizes that knowledge. He forces a race the jet can't run at full stride. The German tries anyway. One engine coughs, then fails. The second explodes under 50 caliber fire. What looks like hot-blooded pursuit is really cold arithmetic. Lane's attack converts altitude into probability. 4,000 feet of potential energy buys him the only currency that matters against a jet: a window. For a handful of seconds, his diving Mustang reaches near jet speed, enough to place rounds where the Me-262 is weakest canopy and nacelle. He doesn't linger. He doesn't turn it into a prolonged chase. He cashes in the window and ends the engagement before the jet's advantages can reassert themselves. 3 different fights, one common thread: discipline over impulse. If technology alone decided wars, the story would end differently. Germany fielded radar-guided night fighters, proximity fuses in limited numbers, V-weapons, and the first operational jet. Yet the Reich was starving for pilots, for fuel, for time. Hitler's bomber obsession grafted dead weight onto the Me-262 program. And Allied strategic bombing took aim not just at airfields, but at the petroleum lifelines that fed every engine in the sky. By March 1945, jet sorties were rationed by the gallon, pilots taxied with engines off, towed when possible, prayed for clean fuel that wouldn't clog filters. Even a perfect machine, and the 262 was not perfect, can't climb out of a bad strategy. The Red Tails understood the inverse. An ordinary machine in extraordinary hands, backed by sound doctrine and reliable logistics, becomes decisive. Their Mustangs weren't exotic. Their advantage was human and institutional. Training at Tuskegee was merciless in its standards, not because the curriculum was cruel, but because the stakes were. Where some groups tolerated swagger and individual score chasing, the 332nd optimized for mission outcomes. Bombers home, formation intact, enemies denied the initiative.
Pay close attention
Stay
to
with the
wing
heavies
structure of the
wasn't
Messerschmitt
just a
Bf
slogan,
109.
it was an ethic.
Identification must
Over
be
months,
instantaneous.
that ethic refined the group's
Stand at
reaction
attention,
time,
cadet.
radio brevity,
those eyes
and
forward.
mutual support into a
That button needs
reflex.
shining.
On March 24th, when jets appeared, those reflexes bent the odds. Consider the cockpit workload at the moment of contact. A P-51 pilot is juggling airspeed, manifold pressure, mixture, prop pitch, coolant temps, fuel tank selection, oxygen flow, all while reading the sky, sun position, contrails, flak bursts, bomber spacing, and the jittery whispers on VHF. Add the tactical calculus, distance to the jets, aspect angles, lead pursuit versus bribes, pure pursuit, whether to break high or cross under, who has tally, who is blind. In that clutter, panic is easy. The Red Tail's radio discipline, short calls, clear vectors, confirmation without chatter keeps the net usable. That's the quiet architecture of victory no camera catches. Then there's the aftermath, the part history often sanitizes. The 330-second lands at Ramitelli to cheers on the line and clipboards in the hangars. Intelligence men pull pilots into drab rooms, unspool camera reels, map debris fields, triangulate witness statements from bomber crews. Confirmation is earned with paperwork as much as with Gunsmoke. In parallel, public affairs officers elsewhere in the theater are selecting which narratives to feed stateside desks. Familiar faces, familiar units, familiar scripts, all easier sells to editors on deadlines. The Red Tail's triple jet day doesn't fit that template. The file goes into a stack marked processed, not promoted. This is how erasure works in real time. Not with red stamps, but with quiet choices about what to spotlight. Ask why a single ace's jet victory becomes poster art, while 3 black pilots' victories become a footnote, and you arrive at the cultural machinery of the 1,940 seconds. Studios greenlight certain heroes.
As victory nears,
Magazines
Americans
feature
everywhere
certain
are
jaw
rallying
lines.
together,
Newsreels
supporting our
cut
troops
certain
and
frames.
building a
The
brighter
rest
tomorrow.
waits for historians.
The strength of our
Yet
nation
even
is found in
then,
the
the
courage
truth
of our
leaks.
troops and the
Bomber
unwavering
crews write
spirit of the
home,
men and
naming
women
the
on
Red
production
Tails who
line.
stayed when others chased. A waist gunner, still shaking, scribbles in a diary. Red-tailed angels. A navigator adds a line to his log. 262 dived 51 inches pursued explosion. Those fragments survive in attics and trunks long after official enthusiasm fades. Decades later, researchers stitch them together with mission reports and unit diaries. A story once improbable becomes undeniable. It's tempting to cast March 24th as a neat parable. Good men defeat bad technology. Reality is messier and more useful. The Me-262 was brilliant engineering shackled to terrible choices. The P-51 was solid engineering, elevated by excellent choices. The lesson isn't anti-technology, it's anti-complacency. Speed doesn't replace tactics. A new platform doesn't erase the need for training, maintenance, fuel, and a strategy that connects tactical actions to strategic ends. That's why the day matters beyond nostalgia. 5 years later, over Korea, American pilots flying F-82s and F-86s would face Soviet-designed MiG-15 jets against jets this time. But the mental models were familiar. Manage energy,
These were the
control
keys to
the
victory in
merge,
European
think in
theater.
vertical geometry, force your opponent into zones where his advantages shrink. The connective tissue runs straight through Berlin, written by men who had to fight twice, once for the mission, once for recognition. And recognition, when it came, arrived like everything in this saga, late, partial, hard-won. Executive Order 9981 integrated the armed forces in 1948, but not the neighborhoods where the pilots returned. not the ballot boxes, not the restaurants with 2 doors. That dissonance explains the particular steel in the Red Tails' demeanor after the war. Brown steered students instead of fighters, still chasing contrails, only now they were trajectories of possibility. Lane steadied hands in the operating room. Brantley pushed against the Jim Crow machinery back home. None needed parades to validate what they already knew.
Notice the red
Excellence
circles
is
here.
its own witness.
Each one represents
So
a
fix
confirmed
March
strategic
24th in your
target within the
mind,
city
not as a
limits.
miracle, but as a map. It charts how to beat a superior machine. Prepare until instinct is just good habit with a clock on it. Study the enemy until his strength becomes your lever. Choose the mission over the headline. And when the turning circle tightens, keep your nerve. That's what Brown, Brantley, and Lane did above Berlin. That's why 3 jets fell. That's why the myth that technology always wins did too. And if the cameras weren't ready to record it, we are. The tape is running now. By the spring of 1945, Nazi Germany was dying, but not yet dead. The Reich's last breath filled the skies over Berlin with smoke and flame, its jet engines shrieking like desperate lungs, trying to outpace gravity itself. Below, the city was rubble. Above, the Red Tails were writing a new chapter of American history, one not about conquest, but about dignity. When historians later dissected that mission, they found it stood at the crossroads of 2 revolutions. One technological, one moral. Technologically, the Me-262 should have heralded the future. It was, in many ways, the blueprint for post-war aviation. Swept wings, jet propulsion, blistering speed. But technology does not win wars alone. Germany built 1,400 Me-262 seconds, yet only a fraction ever flew. The rest languished in hangars, starved of fuel, spare parts, and pilots. It was a masterpiece of engineering, strangled by bad leadership and strategic blindness. The Red Tails P-51 seconds, by contrast, were an expression of balance, range, maneuverability, endurance. The Mustang wasn't a miracle machine. It was the sum of clear thinking, industrial coordination, and a logistical network that stretched from Detroit to the English Channel. It was proof that strategy, not novelty, decides survival. That day over Berlin, Brown, Brantley, and Lane didn't just defeat jets. They defeated the illusion of invincibility, the same illusion that fuels every empire's collapse.
American labor.
The other revolution was human. The Tuskegee Airmen shattered one of America's oldest myths, that excellence had a color. Before 1941, entire shelves of military doctrine were filled with racist pseudoscience. Officers lectured that black men lacked mechanical aptitude and courage under pressure. Sociologists published studies proving that segregation was natural. Yet by 1945, the most reliable escort group in the entire 15th Air Force, the 1 bomber crews begged for war red tails and brown faces. Even so, victory did not erase prejudice overnight. When the airmen returned home, they stepped off transport ships into a country that still labeled them colored. Many were denied jobs that their experience clearly qualified them for. A few were beaten by police in uniform, but they carried something no one could take away, an unassailable record. Roscoe Brown, reflecting decades later, said, "We had to be twice as good to be considered equal, so we became twice as good." It wasn't bitterness, it was fact. Excellence had been their only weapon against invisibility. Captain Brantley used that weapon in a different arena. Back in Georgia, he became a quiet activist, leveraging his veteran status to challenge local officials who barred black citizens from voting. He organized petition drives, spoke at churches, and taught younger veterans how to navigate bureaucracy, the kind of grassroots courage that rarely makes history books but changes towns forever. Earl Lane carried his precision into medicine. As a surgeon, he practiced in communities long neglected by white hospitals. When reporters later asked if flying fighters had prepared him for surgery, he smiled. Both require calm hands and clear decisions under pressure. Their post-war lives reflected a truth the 1,940 seconds couldn't yet say aloud. The battlefields of equality often begin in someone else's war. The 1,970 seconds brought slow vindication. As America reeled from Vietnam and questioned its myths of heroism, historians dug into the archives and found the red tails waiting there, patient and undeniable. Documentaries aired, interviews resurfaced. The public began to grasp that these men had not merely fought Germans, they had fought for the right to fight at all. When President George W. Bush awarded the surviving airmen the Congressional Gold Medal in 2007, his words captured that dual struggle. The Tuskegee Airmen helped win a war, and they helped change our nation for the better. Roscoe Brown, then in his 80s, stood ramrod straight as he accepted the medal. Behind him, younger pilots, black, white, male, female, watched in silent gratitude. The applause that filled the hall was more than ceremonial. It was history correcting itself. Yet, the lesson of March 24th, 1945, remains painfully current. It reminds us that innovation without integrity is brittle, that progress, whether in technology or society, collapses when it forgets who it's for. The Me-262 was faster, stronger, and newer, but it served a dying ideology. The Red Tails flew older machines, but they served an idea still becoming: equality. One vanished in the ruins of Berlin, the other took flight across generations. Today, every pilot who climbs into an F-35 or a C-17, every cadet who salutes under a flag that no longer divides by color, inherits a fraction of that sky. They fly because others once refused to believe that limits were permanent. In the final gun camera footage from that day, grainy, flickering, barely legible, you can just make out the silhouette of a Me-262 bursting into flame. The camera wobbles as the Mustang banks away. There's no triumphant music, no shouted celebration, just a steady voice on the radio. Splash one jet. 3 words, a lifetime of meaning. That transmission closed a chapter not only for the war in Europe, but for the moral arithmetic of a nation learning to live up to its own creed. Roscoe Brown, Charles Brantley, and Earl Lane didn't just win dogfights. They proved that skill, courage, and honor can rise higher than prejudice, higher than fear, higher than any engine thrust mankind can build. March 24th, 1945, the Day 3 Red Tails reached into the future and made it their own.